Odds are you've heard of Pathfinder, the TTRPG produced by Paizo that recently started its remastered second edition. But have you ever wondered where exactly the competing fantasy RPG came from? The answer takes us on a journey through the more recent editions of D&D, from 3rd edition all the way to 5.5, or as it should have been called, Advanced 5e. More importantly, it takes us on a journey through the history of the Open Gaming License, or OGL for short. The Open Gaming License lets companies all over the world make products for D&D and other games based on the D&D SRD, the base mechanics of the game. As a matter of fact, we're going to be stopping at not just one, but two different fiascos surrounding the OGL that led to Paizo and other companies needing to forge in new directions. So how do licensing disputes lead to friendly companies becoming market rivals? To answer that question, we need to take a trip to the distant year of 2002. Before Paizo could make Pathfinder and become the subject of a million internet debates, they had to start somewhere that they could show their chops and build an audience. That start was with Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine in 2002. Since 1976, people had read Dragon Magazine, and since 1986, its companion, the Dungeon Magazine. The magazines were full of lore, interviews, explorations of characters and settings, and all kinds of different extras. But once WotC, specifically with Hasbro in the background, took over, interest in the magazine waned until the license to publish it was sold to Paizo in 2002. Paizo published lots of familiar favorites, including fictional interviews with fantasy wizards, but their real ticket was adventures that would span issues of the magazine. The articles were well received, but specifically the adventure paths seemed to draw attention. Eventually, Wizards of the Coast ended their licensing agreement and left Paizo to their own devices. This happened in 2007, leading to some questions about future plans for Paizo. The solution? Adventure paths. These paths broke full-length campaigns into a series of adventures that could be played individually or all together, leading from one to the next. Their very first adventure path was Rise of the Rune Lords, a legendary adventure across 6 96-page arcs spanning 15 levels of epic investigations into the influence of the long-dead Thessalonian Empire. Over the next few years, Paizo produced 3 more paths for D&D 3.5 before our first OGL conflict bubbled up. Prepare yourselves for deja vu. The problems really started with the release of 4th edition in 2007 and 2008, and the resulting shifts around the release. Now, 4th edition catches a lot of flack, but the real issue here comes down to 2 factors. The first is that 4th edition was mechanically an entirely different game than what people were used to, fundamentally changing how allies and enemies function. This meant that porting things from earlier editions was much more difficult and would require full-on game development for even pretty basic homebrew. The other issue was that with 4th edition came a much more restrictive version of the OGL. The optics of these 2 choices were immediately clear to people in the industry. Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast had made it harder to make OGL content and harder to use old content, essentially making a mad grab for control of a market that they had used these other companies to build. This left countless designers scrambling to figure out what to do. The long-running strategy had been to make the jump with new and exciting additions. But that felt like more of a devil's bargain than a new chapter with these changes that were just announced. Different solutions emerged for different groups, but for a decent number, the solution was to just ignore 4E altogether. With that spirit in mind, Paizo began working on an adventure for the now outdated D&D 3.5 called Pathfinder. If you've enjoyed the video so far, please subscribe to the channel so we can keep making TTRPG content like this. So, the adventure paths had proven a major success for Paizo, and the company was understandably hesitant to fall in line with the changes at WotC. Making the jump to 4th edition would be costly, as design teams making the switch ran into issues acclimating to the new system, and they would risk alienating the customers frustrated with the new edition. Further, Paizo wasn't given a copy of the new 4E rules, which was a common courtesy for closely connected developers, and fears brewed that Paizo wouldn't be well supported. The first solution that emerged was to try and make an adventure that could bridge the gap between 3.5 and 4, and supposedly, this adventure path was called Pathfinder. Even this safe step, however, left some room for concern. What if the new policy from Wizards turned to full paid licensing? Or worse, a non-commercial license? That would mean Paizo's entire business would evaporate with a single decision. The uncertainty over what to do next and a general sense that Wizards and Hasbro was looking to abandon their long-term allies led them to a new solution. The solution would spur from a common habit of people that play TTRPGs: the need to fix rules that seem out of place or otherwise poorly designed. Jason Bowman, a prominent figure at Paizo, had been working on a cleaned-up version of 3.5 for his own game, and after the topic came up, the next step seemed inevitable. Why don't we just make our own game instead of bending to the powers that be at Hasbro? They kept the name of the original adventure, and Pathfinder was born. The game was designed with an open playtest model, where the audience could give feedback and have their issues addressed. These earlier rules were popular enough to win a few awards while still in playtest. Eventually, the playtest had its findings, and on August 9th of 2009, Pathfinder 1e was released. Pathfinder's core rulebook was a behemoth at 576 pages and quickly took off as a major success. The game was focused on making individual classes more substantial to prevent the constant multi-classing 3rd edition had become famous for, as well as addressing issues with balance in combat. In 2010, the book won several ENnie awards, including Product of the Year, Best Game, Best Interior Art, and Best Production Value. Between the release of Pathfinder and D&D 5e, Pathfinder actually routinely outsold D&D and has stayed in a frequent second place outside those times. Paizo kept their adventure path model running and enjoyed great success across the edition's run, including the release of a partner product, Starfinder. Starfinder explored the core setting of Pathfinder, called Galarian, but in a potential future where the people had taken to the stars. Rather than a simple sourcebook, this was a full system made to be compatible with Pathfinder. This would all continue ahead until 2nd edition was announced, and yet another OGL scandal rocked the TTRPG community. In 2018, Paizo announced that Pathfinder 2nd edition was on the horizon, and just as with 1st edition, it would start with a playtest. The game focused on making the action economy more streamlined, and fixing other problem areas like item hoarding, most of which are core issues carried over from D&D. The full Pathfinder 2e was released August 1st, 2019. Unfortunately, the year that followed wasn't exactly conducive to great success in the world of TTRPGs. Whether or not the pandemic affected the release is a subject for debate, but the following years quickly had another surprise in the form of a new OGL fiasco. Wizards announced oned&d in 2022, and a suite of changes to the open gaming license quickly came to light. Just to refresh, the OGL is what lets other companies produce materials for the D20 system. This free license to have your product be compatible with D&D meant other companies would be more likely to prioritize working with D&D and would make their customers Wizards of the Coast customers as well. It led in large part to the success of 3rd and 5th edition, and disruption had been well established as a fast track to trouble. So when the revealed changes not only further restricted content, but also made it so anyone making a decent profit would need to start paying royalties, things went sour fast. This development spurred an avalanche of new products and new game systems. But for Paizo, it spawned the 2e Remaster, an effort to go through the game and scrub things covered by the OGL out of its pages, renaming monsters and spells and cutting some other minor portions of the game. In addition, it made for a great opportunity to do some other tweaks to strengthen the game itself. The result was the new player core and GM core, and a major shift back in Paizo's direction as disenchanted players went looking for new games. This is where we find Pathfinder now. Not once, but twice formed in sudden shifts brought on by the clawing hands of Hasbro shareholders. So that's how we go from Paizo as the publishers of a magazine for Dungeons & Dragons to Pathfinder as the main competition for the world's greatest role-playing game. Some parts of the story had to be left out because they were either too hard to verify or would have taken us on too long of a tangent. But we might circle back on those, so if you would like us to make a more in-depth video on those tangents, just let us know in the comments. And hey, maybe the next time Hasbro pulls the strings and pushes us deeper into monetization and AI, you GMs out there might give Pathfinder a try. Let us know some of your favorite TTRPGs in the comments for when you need a change of scenery. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and stay foolish.